Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're doing a deep dive into a verdict that, well, it sparked a lot of debate. The federal jury trial of Sean Diddy Combs.
Yeah, and this isn't just about one, high-profile case.
Exactly. It's really a window into our justice system, the influence of wealth, celebrity.
And how we as a culture think about accountability, especially for survivors.
So we've looked at a whole range of analyses, different reports.
Trying to get different perspectives on this verdict and what it means, because the implications are pretty unsettling in places.
Our goal here is to help you navigate all that, sort of pull out the key insights so you really understand what went down and why it matters so much.
Okay, so where do we start? The verdict itself.
Yeah, let's start there. July 2nd, 2025, a federal jury comes back with what a lot of people are calling a mixed outcome.
Mixed is one word for it. He was acquitted on the really serious charges, 2 counts of sex trafficking, 1 count of racketeering conspiracy.
Right. The racketeering part basically means they didn't find he ran a large-scale criminal enterprise.
Correct. But he was found guilty on 2 counts of violating the Mann Act.
Which is about transporting people across state lines for prostitution.
Exactly. So held accountable for something, yes, but a much lesser offense compared to the allegations of this widespread organized abuse.
And the reaction, it was immediate and just completely polarized, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You had Combs' supporters outside the courthouse cheering, chanting, "Let Puffy go," his family celebrating.
But then on the flip side, groups like Ultraviolet.
Yeah, women's rights organizations came out strong. Ultraviolet called it a stain on a criminal justice system, saying it fails survivors like the ones in this case.
For a lot of people watching, it felt like a miscarriage of justice.
You have to remember the accusations. Years of alleged violence, coercion, exploitation, these drug-fueled freak-off parties that were described.
And the evidence presented was powerful.
Yeah.
That surveillance footage of Combs beating Cassie Ventura in the hotel hallway.
Just brutal. And then the testimony from multiple women, really graphic accounts of being controlled, terrorized, forced into sex acts.
It's hard to square that evidence, that testimony, with this outcome. It really makes you think.
It does. And one commentator put it quite bluntly, calling the verdict not true justice at all, but rather a cultural compromise protecting male power.
That's a heavy statement. What's behind that idea? That it's a cultural compromise?
Well, it suggests maybe there's this underlying societal tendency, maybe unconscious, to protect powerful men, especially wealthy, famous ones, even when faced with serious evidence. It's like preserving their status quo is easier than full accountability.
And you see that reflected in the logical knot experts are pointing out.
Oh, yeah. The big question. How could the jury decide Combs didn't coerce or traffic his victims, yet still believe he illegally transported women for sex?
It doesn't quite add up, does it? How do you transport someone for prostitution without some element of coercion or control involved, especially given the background?
Exactly. It sends a really confusing message about what constitutes trafficking and abuse.
And the defense strategy, they leaned into this, didn't they?
They did. It was quite a strategy. Combs' lawyers basically admitted he was a serial abuser. They said it was fueled by jealousy, drugs.
They even conceded the video of him attacking Cassie was disturbing.
Right. They didn't try to hide that. But their key argument was, okay, he was abusive, but there's no proof he forced her into sexual acts against her will.
So they created this firewall between the physical abuse and the alleged sexual coercion.
Precisely. And that's where experts like Emma Katz, who studies domestic violence, say the jury really misunderstood something crucial.
What was the misunderstanding?
They seem to buy the defense's distinction that domestic violence is not sex trafficking, as if you can beat and control someone, but somehow that control doesn't extend to coercion in sexual matters.
Which seems counterintuitive, to say the least.
It really does. It shows a lack of understanding about coercive control, how it works in abusive relationships. It's why anti-trafficking advocates were calling the decision a travesty.
So it's less about legal loopholes and more about a fundamental misunderstanding of the dynamics of abuse itself.
A big part of it, yes. And it hints at that larger societal problem we touched on. This reluctance, maybe, to hold famous, powerful men fully accountable for sexual abuse.
Like we're conditioned somehow.
Yeah, that maybe jurors and maybe society more broadly are sort of conditioned to see these crimes as something more socially acceptable, like bad behavior, especially when it's a celebrity, not as the serious crimes they are.
And this connects directly to the idea of a pay-to-win justice system.
Absolutely. The Combs case feels like a really stark example of how wealth and status can tilt the scales. And This isn't new.
No, the sources we looked at trace this back. Talk about the Supreme Court shift.
Right, back in the mid-20th century, you had the Warren Court, more focused on protecting the poor. Then Nixon's appointments shifted things, making the court more sympathetic to, well, wealth.
Leading to the white-collar paradox.
Exactly. Where conservative justices sometimes show more leniency towards wealthy defendants accused of financial crimes, for example. The 1983 Raymond Dirks case is a classic
The
example.
Wall Street guy.
Yeah, wealthy investor. Convicted of insider trading, had clear evidence against him, but the conviction was overturned. It showed how legal interpretations could favor the rich.
And it's not just the high courts. Down in the trial courts, money buys better lawyers.
Right, undeniably. Think about O.J. Simpson back in '94.
The trial of the century.
Right, the evidence seemed overwhelming. Blood, hair, shoe prints.
But he had the dream team.
Exactly. Reportedly costing $50,000 a day. His wealth bought him an incredible defense team. And Simpson himself said later he wouldn't have stood a chance if he was just an average person.
That's a pretty direct admission of how money influences outcomes.
It really is. It highlights that access to top legal talent, the ability to fund exhaustive investigations, challenge evidence. It makes a massive difference.
And sometimes wealth itself almost becomes part of the defense, doesn't it? This idea of affluenza.
Ah, yes. Affluenza, this supposed psychosis where extreme wealth means you just can't understand consequences.
It sounds made up.
Well, the sources are clear. It has no medical basis whatsoever. But it gained notoriety with Ethan Couch.
The teenager who killed 4 people drunk driving in 2013.
That's the one. His defense argued affluenza, that his privilege meant he wasn't truly responsible. And incredibly.
He got a light sentence, 720 days in jail.
Yeah. It suggests juries can sometimes be swayed by this narrative that privilege somehow mitigates responsibility. It's disturbing.
And the flip side is just as disturbing. What happens when you don't have money? Keith Harward's case.
A tragic example. Wrongfully convicted of murder and rape in '86. Had an alibi.
But convicted anyway.
Convicted based on what some call poor people science. Courts being more willing to accept questionable evidence when the defendant lacks resources. In this case, it was bite mark evidence.
Which is notoriously unreliable.
Very criticized, yes. And it took until 2016 with DNA evidence for him to finally be exonerated. A stark contrast.
So bringing it back to Combs, if the system favors wealth and the industry enables behavior, how did he allegedly get away with this for so long?
That really seems to come down to industry complicity. According to our sources, his misconduct was essentially hiding in plain sight.
Hiding in plain sight. How so?
Well, those infamous parties were described as an open secret, just part of the celebrity lifestyle, almost expected.
And he even joked about it on TV.
Yeah, back in 2002 on national TV, joking about having to keep them women there at his parties. It got laughs, not scrutiny. Treated like a punchline.
That's pretty chilling, normalizing predatory talk.
It created this environment where, as one songwriter put it, this is not a Diddy story. This is an abuse in music story. Permissiveness became part of the brand. Outrageous conduct was just business as usual.
People look the other way.
Worse than that, there are suggestions of active cover-ups. Recent lawsuits allege Universal Music Group systematically paid hush money 6 figures to silence women with sexual assault claims.
So not just ignoring, but actively facilitating the silence.
Exactly. And NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, were key tools.
Aubrey O'Day talked about this, right?
She revealed that getting her music rights back from Combs came with a catch. Sign an NDA promising never to disparage Puff Combs or his businesses ever again.
Wow. So your art is held hostage unless you agree to silence.
It's a powerful tool. These agreements have historically allowed powerful figures to operate with impunity. It creates this culture of secrecy that perpetuates abuse.
Until the dam finally broke.
Yeah, late 2023, Cassie Ventura filed her lawsuit.
And even though Combs settled that quickly,
it opened the floodgates. Her bravery seemed to embolden others. Dozens came forward. By the time of the criminal trial, there were over 70 civil suits against him.
it just took one person to finally crack it open.
It often does, but it highlights the desperate need for the industry to reckon with this complicity, as the sources say, to prioritize people over profit.
Otherwise, it just stays this fertile ground for exploitation.
Precisely.
And thinking about the survivors. Cassie Ventura, the woman known as Jane, the others. The impact of this partial acquittal must be immense.
Oh, profound. Think about the bravery it took. Stepping into that harsh spotlight, recounting the absolute darkest traumas in excruciating detail.
Cassie's testimony. Being punched, kicked, stomped on the face, forced into group sex.
Just unimaginable to relive that publicly. And then for the jury to come back not guilty on the most serious charges, it essentially invalidated the worst of their experiences.
Minimizing their suffering.
Exactly. Reports mentioned advocates and fellow artists feeling physically ill, anguished. Aubrey O'Day said, "This makes me physically ill. Cassie probably feels so horrible. It's like a second wave of trauma."
And now they face having their truth picked apart and doubted publicly.
Yeah, that's the cruel aftermath. This narrative starts bubbling up. Maybe prosecutors overreached. Maybe he wasn't really a sex trafficker.
Which just re-traumatizes them all over again.
It's seen as an indictment of a culture in which not believing women and victims of sexual assault remains endemic. It taps into that deep-seated societal skepticism.
And the message it sends to other survivors.
It's undeniably chilling. It could absolutely discourage others from coming forward. You see people like Keisha, Fatima Goss-Graves, affirming Cassie and Jane's bravery.
But it feels like cold comfort, as one source put it.
Yeah, when the verdict itself seems to cast doubt on the very worst of what they endured.
So this verdict, it doesn't exist in a vacuum, does it?
Yeah.
It feels like part of a pattern.
It really does fit that larger pattern of impunity for the rich and famous. O.J.'s acquittal, Bill Cosby's conviction getting overturned on a technicality.
Despite dozens of accusers in Cosby's case.
Right. And it fuels cynicism. You see rapper 50 Cent tweeting, "Diddy beat the feds. That boy a bad man," almost celebrating getting away with it. It erodes trust.
So if this pattern exists, what can actually be done? How do we work towards a system where justice isn't just for the wealthy?
Our sources suggest several concrete steps. First off, education.
For jurors, for the public.
Both. Much better education about the realities of sexual violence, about trauma bonding that complex psychological attachment victims can form with abusers.
Right, the whole cycle of abuse and reinforcement.
Exactly, and coercive control. Understanding it's not just physical violence, but a pattern of domination, isolation. The trial showed jurors didn't grasp these dynamics.
So better expert witnesses, clearer jury instructions, something to combat that "why didn't you just leave" mentality.
Absolutely, and stronger witness protections are crucial.
Like more anonymity, closed court testimony.
Things like that, yes. And real swift consequences for powerful defendants who try to retaliate against witnesses. Make it clear that won't be tolerated.
And what about the industry's role? The entertainment world.
There needs to be a willingness from the industry, from society, to actually strip abusers of their platforms and influence when credible allegations surface, not just shrugging it off for profit.
So structural changes, independent review boards maybe.
Things like that could help. Investigative bodies within the music industry, perhaps. Something to enforce accountability internally.
And potentially legal reforms, too.
Yeah, maybe adjusting statutes to make it more straightforward to prosecute sex trafficking when it happens within intimate partner relationships. So cases don't fail because of outdated interpretations that let abusers slip through.
Because the ultimate goal has to be
Equal justice. It has to apply to everyone, regardless of fame or fortune, or, as one source powerfully put it, it ceases to be justice.
This has been, well, a really deep look at how complex these intersections are. Celebrity, justice, accountability, industry power. It's all tangled up.
It really is.
And I'm struck by how deep some of these systemic problems run. The Combs verdict, it really does feel like a sobering indictment, not just of one man, but of a system, a culture.
That still struggles, really struggles, to hold powerful people accountable and to truly believe and protect the people they harm.
It leaves you wondering, doesn't it? What shifts, both personally and in society, do we actually need to make?
Yeah, what does it take to ensure truth and accountability actually win out over money and fame?
Not just in court, but everywhere, in every industry, every community.
So that no survivor, after showing immense bravery, ever feels like it was all in